Okay. Good evening, everyone. Here we are continuing our journey through the Bhagavad Gita, commentary of Swami Kriyananda. We are up to chapter 5 of the 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. We're at chapter 5, verse 15. And let us begin our session with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your living presence within us, guiding our every thought, our every feeling, that all our outward expression will be a smooth flow of grace emanating from your inspiration within. Help us to leave behind all confusions of delusion, that we may live ever as perfect reflections of thy will. Om. Peace. Amen. This verse, number 15 in chapter 5, the all-pervading is not concerned about people's sins or virtues. Wisdom, although the natural state of every man, is eclipsed by cosmic delusion. Mankind thus becomes bewildered as to the difference between right and wrong. I just started laughing so much when I read this. I'm sure Krishna didn't mean it as a comedy routine, but just that phrase, mankind thus becomes bewildered as to the difference between right and wrong. Well, that about sums it up, doesn't it? It's like there we are in this creation, and we cannot tell which way, which action, which thought is going to actually lead to happiness and freedom. Because wisdom, although the natural state of man, our true nature is one with the divine, omniscient in our understanding. Wisdom, although the natural state of man, is eclipsed by cosmic delusion, the force of Maya. Now, you have to forgive me because I do a lot of different programs in the course of the 2 weeks between these, but I know we were talking about Maya somewhere else. I was talking about Satan somewhere else, and I'm not quite sure whether it was here or in another program, but the point being, there is this force, and I'm pretty sure it was in these seminars, I hope it was. There is this force that is outward moving. And you know, everybody can get very complex philosophically about what Maya is, what Satan is, what the devil is, all of these things, and we can endlessly just spin and try to understand it. And when we're finished with all of that intellectuality, we still get up in the morning and we have to try to figure out what actions are going to bring us happiness and which actions are going to bring us suffering. And all of us just live in this strange experience of being consistently confused and blinded. Even when we know, even when the theoretical possibilities are perfectly clear to us, and this is a chapter in the Gita, it's a verse in the Gita, where Arjuna says to Krishna, why is it, I remember now, this was a Sunday service. This is where it came from. Ah, yes. The topic of the Sunday service is Satan real? The answer is yes. And then we managed to spin that into 30 minutes of conversation, but the answer was one syllable and it was really not obscure. Yeah, it's real. And the verse was, Arjuna says to Krishna, why is it that mankind, against his will, is compelled over and over again to act against his own best interests? And then Krishna says, desire, anger. That's what causes it. That these forces that we want. And then the question is, why do we want? Why is it that we're drawn? Why, the thing about the human being is, when we have evolved through the animal stages to reach the point where we this is how Swami describes it, and it's such a perfect way to describe it. He says, we manifest in the process of reincarnation, we manifest the physical body that is capable of expressing the level of consciousness that we have evolved to. And when I say we, I'm talking about that individual spark of divinity. The best word for it in English is the word soul, but that's not a very good word. The better word is the Indian word jiva, which means the individual spark of divinity, which is uniquely ours. And through all our incarnations, that individual spark exists. Yogananda said that he remembered being himself all the way back to the level of a diamond. Now that was repeated, to me, I don't think by Swamiji, but perhaps it was by him, but it was reputed to have been spoken by Yogananda, and we've talked about it many different times, meaning it's been part of the lexicon of Ananda reflection about Master's consciousness. If he was individualized at the point of being a diamond, like it just, you don't even quite know what to think about it. I do know when I purchased the astrological stones that I wear, when I picked out both the emerald and the yellow sapphire, I had several to choose from. In fact, even sort of a little pile of stones to choose from. And maybe I'm just being sentimental, I don't know. But the ones that I ended up taking home, it's like they said, I want to go home with you. I'm your stone. Take me home. And it was really like, there was no question. There was this pile of stones for the yellow one and for the green one. There were these pile of stones, and this is the one that was mine. So I think about that, like, is there a unique individual consciousness that's already formed at this point? And then, of course, it led to all sorts of other questions. Like a friend of mine said, well, if Master remembers all the way back to being a diamond, like, how long are you a diamond? And then, is the diamond the top of the heap for gemstones, or do you get to be an emerald afterwards? It's like, where do you move around? I thought it was a very interesting question. I took it to Swamiji. I asked him, how long are you a diamond? His response was, that's a silly question. By that time in my life, which was, just after 2000, but at that point in my life, I was quite comfortable being foolish. It didn't matter to me. And so I said, well, I thought it was an interesting question, Swamiji. And oftentimes something would happen with Swami where he would I would say sometimes, because he wasn't rude as a rule, he was very attentive. But sometimes he would dismiss a question like that, like, I don't want to answer that question, that's just a silly question, or I don't know the answer. And then the next moment he would say something profound, which is exactly what happened. He said he thought that was a silly question. I said I thought it was an interesting question, and who else could I ask but you? And then he was silent for a moment, and then he said, all time is short compared to eternity. And that has been something I have really remembered. From the human perspective, it seems like, just even to imagine thinking how much evolution has to take place from being a diamond in somebody's ring to being a human being, if it's the same jiva. If Master could remember all the way back, there's no place for it. You don't even know what to think about it. And but all time is short compared to eternity. And so the whole picture of what that might mean, it silences our petty intellectuality. And I don't mean to be rude, because I'm an intellectual enough person that I enjoy getting the principles straight and having discussions. But I don't like to, I can only take it so far, and then it ceases to be of interest to me, because what can I do with it? Which is what I think Swami meant, now that I think about it. Like, Asha, what are you going to do when you find out how long it takes to get out of being a diamond? Like, how is that? Is that a practical piece of information? Actually, now that I think about it, that's what he meant. Which is, it's just idle curiosity. Why are you wasting my time with idle curiosity that has no practical application? I could still argue that it was an interesting question, but I think that's what he was responding to. But it prompted from him an answer that's been extraordinarily useful to me. Because many times when we're in the midst of things, or we're just faced with something that we have to go through, but all time is short compared to eternity. And Swami answered me in a different context in a very similar manner, when his health was very poor and I hadn't seen him for a while, and I traveled to whatever country he was living in, which I think was Italy at that time. And when I saw him first, how are you, sir? And I knew from others that his health had been very poor. Oh, he said, not well, he said, but compared to eternity, what difference does it make? This life is just a flash in the pan, and then it's an eternity of bliss. So what are we so concerned about all the time? However, mankind has become bewildered, and therefore we can't tell the difference between what really matters and what doesn't, what is right and what is wrong. Right is that which moves us toward the light, and wrong is that which pulls us away from the light. That's the entire definition. There's a whole social construct and so on, because there are behaviors that lift us and there's behaviors that don't. Now, just a moment though, but I had another thought that I was reaching for, and I want to see if I can find it again. Let's see, just a moment, what was it? I was going somewhere else. Well, I seem to have now lost that thread, so I'll just have to let it sit for a minute. Can't catch it again. I hope it comes back in a minute. So the other part of this, besides my total enjoyment of the fact that we're bewildered and can't tell the difference between right and wrong, is the all-pervading is not concerned about people's sins and virtues. Now that is something that we need to take very, very, very deeply into ourselves, because, well, in the course of my years of living in community, which is now all my adult life, essentially, and the many opportunities, by the grace of God, that I've had to share with people whatever it is that I've learned from Swamiji, the number of times that the foundation stone of the difficulties people bring to me, it's because they have become excessively concerned about what they consider to be their failures, or their errors, or whatever it might be, or their insecurities about not really being able to live up to the promise that they thought they had, or the need for success. And I myself have fought this same battle. I fought this same battle for many, many years, and I have a deep sympathy for it. In the early, through the years of the 1970s, maybe a little into the 80s, when Ananda was just, when we were just Ananda Village, and we were just beginning to develop some of the programs for guests and training programs that have now, seen much more sophisticated iterations. But we had some kind of a teacher training program, and at that time Jyotish and Devi were teaching it at the very first, and it was about a 4-week course, 4-week resident course in the community. It was a very nice program. And Devi remarked once, after she taught that course a few times, and there was a whole curriculum that she was supposed to teach, and this is how she described it. She says, I sit in the room with all these students. They're all, she said, they're all angelic beings. They're deeply sincere. They're there because they want to understand higher teachings. They have a deep desire to share what they learn with others. You just can't imagine a kinder more well-intentioned group of people. And she said, when she first started teaching the Course, she thought her assignment was to convey to them this body of information that they were going to need to know in order to be able to be teachers, to share this teaching. And there is a very interesting body of teaching. The Art and Science of Raja Yoga was probably the textbook, and it still is to this day for many of those courses. But she said she realized that what was holding these people back from being very effective in what they were trying to do, which was to share these uplifting teachings, was not their lack of information. It was their lack of belief in their own goodness, and therefore their lack of belief in the idea that they had something worthwhile to share. And she said no matter how much information they packed in, without that essential understanding of their own goodness, she said they would never be able to really put it across to other people in the magnetic way that would be most effective. And so she realized that her job in that 4-week course was to help people believe that God loved them. And see, we just have this idea in our head based on our own judgmental nature. Since we are continually judging everyone around us, when we project that out, sort of our own life experience, we project it out to the cosmic level, we can't help but think that God is just a giant, bigger form of us. And so if we have all this weighing and measuring and evaluating and accepting and rejecting, we just project that right onto the divine. And we think that God is just sitting up there liking and disliking us in the same way that we like and dislike others and like and dislike ourselves. And it's very hard for us to get our minds around the fact that the cosmic perspective on us is completely different. When I was working as Swami's secretary, which I did for 3 or 4 years, around, what would it have been? 1973 to 76, somewhere, in that area. I did it for a few years. And one of the things I did was I kept his appointments. And during especially the early part of that, he lived at Ayodhya, which was one section of Ananda village. But the only temple we had was at the meditation retreat. And Swami also had a house there. He'd also lived there. So he would come up for the weekends. He would come up and give the weekend programs. And then on Sunday afternoons, individuals who wanted to have a personal conference with Swamiji would make an appointment, and they'd make the appointment through me. I kept his calendar. And then in the summertime, they would come, and I would keep the calendar moving, so that he could see a lot of people. And he gave people half an hour, I think, at the most, because it didn't take that long for him to understand what the story was. He once said, and it was a different context, this man had really gotten himself in trouble, but he was not yet willing to admit that had really gotten himself in trouble. And Swamiji was trying to extricate him from the trouble he'd made for himself. And the man was local here in Palo Alto, but Swami was at the village, and the man was going to drive up to the village to talk to Swami, but he told Swami, I need at least an hour to explain everything to you. And Swami said, anything you want, you can have my whole afternoon, because it was a very important situation to sort out. But afterwards, Swami said to me, he said, truth can be told very quickly. Self-justification, however, takes a long time. I don't put that man's name on that story because after a while he asked me to stop telling it. I never would have anyway, but it was very funny when it happened. Let's see now. That was oh yes. So people were going in to see Swami and the appointments were short because self-justification wasn't required. And I would sit outside with them out on the porch, just keeping people company, having them come early enough, And then I realized that my job really was to just calm them down. Because they were about to have a one-on-one, unique conversation with this man that they had tremendous reverence for, which was appropriate. And of course, who had a vibration that was really like nobody else's. And one had the feeling, which I, through my life experience, proved was entirely justified, that he could see right into you. He even said himself, he said, just a glance at someone's eyes, he said, I get the whole picture. He didn't advertise that, but he said things like that from time to time. But I realized that my job was to calm them down so that they would be able to enjoy their conversation with Swami. But this was the oddity that I realized, which is we're always judging each other. People are judging each other all the time. You look at someone and you think, my, that shirt doesn't match the jacket, does it? Or, or what does she see in a man like that? It's constantly, it's constant, isn't? And that hair color is much too young for her. It goes on and on and on. And I'm just randomly pulling examples out. So we're just walking around all the time in a sea of other people's criticism, because that's what human beings are like. Most people just operate according to their likes and dislikes, and their likes and dislikes just run. A friend of mine who was a color consultant, extremely talented, she was just marvelous at intuiting sort of how to present yourself in the best possible way. She worked just with ordinary people, and she worked with business people and movie stars and celebrities and television personalities, because this color, this kind of earring, this hair, for the men, this little bit of facial hair, no facial hair, just all these different things. She was superb at it. But she'd had to talk about how when she was first learning it, she was analyzing everyone. She would stand in the grocery line and think about that color, that style, that work, that didn't. She said she finally just had to train herself to blank her mind, because, very few people were presenting themselves at their best. And so it was just wearing her out. But I had to explain to them that Swami Kriyananda is likely the only person you will meet in your life who doesn't have a shred of judgment. He will perceive you, that's a fact. He will, and to use my own way of saying it, Swami always understood me. He understood me better than I knew myself. It got to the point where when Swami would say, how are you? I would say, I don't know, sir, how am I? I just like, what do I care what I think? What I want to know is what you're seeing. Because he always saw me exactly as I was. So that was true. But that it would then follow that there would be some judgment of a negative kind behind that was entirely our egoic human construction, where we're always dividing the world up into yes and no's, because we have become bewildered about what is right and wrong. And so I would have to just try to tell people, you're being judged by people all the time, and you still just live and breathe and don't think about it. So why bring into this one situation, the one time when you can be fearless about being actually seen just as you are? Because that's what it is when we begin to move ourselves to a greater state of self-realization. What that means is that our perception begins to match the divine perception. And one of the ways that it begins to match is we get a God's eye view. And the God's eye view is that wisdom, although the natural state of every man, is eclipsed by cosmic delusion. And Divine Mother, God, Guru, however you want to think about it, it's like they know what's happening here, which is that we have been given this opportunity. And now I remember the thought that I lost, so I'm going to go back to it. Swamiji explains, as we progress from the diamond or whatever level we first start and moving through it, we manifest a body that is sophisticated enough to express the level of consciousness that the jiva has attained. So Master said that monkeys, dogs, and horses were the most intelligently evolved of all the animals. He didn't say, well, whales or dolphins, but Monkeys, dogs, and horses, that's what he said. Okay, so you have, beneath that, you have ducks and chickens and lizards and squirrels and crows, and you just have all these other creatures, all of which manifest a certain kind of intelligence and understanding. Our community here, we have a certain amount of land around us. We have this big green park area in front of us, and over the course of some months, we became a very popular hangout for crows. I mean, and just lots and lots of crows. And crows are very, very loud. And there was big flocks of them, and they begin to chase the smaller birds away. They might even eat the smaller birds. I'm not quite sure what the food chain is there. But anyway, they became a reality. For me, I just kind of perceived these things without really thinking about it. But there were some people who were quite distressed about there being so many crows in the community for a whole variety of reasons. So I was actually staying in a friend's apartment on the other side of the green. And early one morning, I looked out the window from where I was staying, and there was this huge circling flock of dozens of crows, and they were screaming, and their screams are pretty impressive, screaming like this. It went on for about 15 or 20 minutes. And then it went away, and it was just like, wow, that was weird. Then I come walking back to the house, this house where I normally stay, and when I got close to the house, I saw hanging from one of the trees out front, upside down, what turned out to be a stuffed animal, but I thought it was a dead crow. It looked like a dead crow. And it was, and I don't know, I thought in my mind that somebody had killed a crow and then hung it there, but it turned out to be something that you can buy. But it looked exactly like a dead crow. And I was so freaked out that I didn't go close to it. I just went around it. And what had happened was, this is something you can do. If crows are bothering you, crows are very, very smart. And apparently what I witnessed was actually a crow funeral. That they thought a crow had died or been killed. They were having a funeral for that dead crow, and we have had almost no crows on the property ever since, because they have now understood that this is a dangerous place for them. Now, quite apart from whether you think it was a good idea or not, I'm only using it as an example of how incredibly intelligent these crows are, and I've heard many other things about how intelligent crows are. But still, a human being has many more options than a crow. But a crow seems to be much smarter and have more options than a lizard may have, for example, or a cockroach, or who knows what other kind of a creature. I can't start comparing all different creatures, and there's probably birds that are less evolved than crows in their intelligence, and all of these different things. So what happens is the jiva gets a certain amount of experience, and it learns everything that it can learn. I always think of the lizards, because lizards are real busy. Lizards are always really, really busy, and they're looking at things and they're doing things. And in the whole long story of how we evolve because we have this drive for experience. We have this drive to increase our awareness. Now, of course, the awareness of a lizard is not going to be that big, but the lizard's going to try to figure out where the best food is, and where the most attractive mate is, or whatever it is that motivates a lizard. And then he's just going to reach the point where, I've done everything I can do. Been there, done that. Lizardness is just like finished, but there's this compelling, the jiva is compelled to continue to expand its awareness. Death comes, and then in an automatic way, that jiva manifests the body that is appropriate for it to work with next. And this is how we move through the animal level. It's really quite fascinating when you say it like that. Manifests the body that allows it to express the fullness of its consciousness. In my book, the book I wrote called Ask Asha, which was a series of questions that were sent to my website of just real questions people asked. And there was one question, and it was fun for me to answer because interesting ideas came to me. The book is very wide-ranging. It's a very good book. That's the only thing I can say. Every time I read a portion of it, I think, wow, that's really good. Who wrote that? But This woman wrote to me because she was very, very upset because it had something to do, I think she had a Great Dane, and it was either her dog to the end of its life, or else she put it in the care of other people, and they ended up putting the dog to sleep. And she was just heartbroken about this. And I wanted to be sympathetic, of course, but I also wanted to give her an honest answer. I said, well, that dog had a really great life with you. It's just marvelous. It got to be your Great Dane, and you loved it so much, and you took care of it, and all of those things were really terrific. But really, there are limits to being a dog. You can have fun up to a certain point, but then, there's a lot of other things that consciousness can experience that a dog just has no access to. And so there'll be just a certain point that no matter how good the dog's life is, so to speak, they want more. They want to be more aware. They want to have more capacity to experience. Here's a really strange story about a dog. There's this Swami Gyanananda was his name. He was a disciple through the same Kriya Yoga lineage. He was a Swiss man, but he lived his entire adult life in India. And at the end, he had a little house up in Dehradun. And many Ananda folks knew him well. He wrote a book called Transcendent Journey, which is really a wonderful read. One day, a taxi cab pulled up to his little ashram there, and the driver opened the car and just handed Gyanananda this little dog. And he had no idea who'd sent it, where it came from, but somebody in some other city, it might have been Delhi, put the dog in the cab and sent the dog to Gyanananda. And Gyanananda, to the end of his life, or the dog's life, just took care of that dog. He felt like God had sent the dog for him to take care of. And it seemed that the dog was some kind of a fallen yogi. Because among other things, the dog could never eat in front of other people. And this is all how the Swami told the story, and he had the intuition to be able to say this is true, that the dog was so embarrassed because he didn't have hands. And in order to eat, he just had to stick his snout into the food. Now, dogs do that all the time, but it's from a human perspective, it's very gross. And this dog was just so embarrassed to be in a body where he just had to put his snout into the food. And so they created a little screen so the dog could go behind the screen, and he didn't have to do this gross action in front of anybody. And it was just fascinating. So we keep moving up, but once we get to the human body has the capacity to develop unnatural appetites. Whereas through the animal level, it's just more or less intuition. Now, people who are really close to animals tell me that animal personalities are as distinct as human personalities. And one woman told me that she had a job taking care of somebody else's dogs, and part of the reason she had that job was because she had 2 dogs of her own, and they could all sort of work together. But she said one of the dogs she was taking care of had perverse appetites, and his bad energy was beginning to affect her dog. So she quit the job and went away. I just said, okay. I mean, I don't have anything. It's not my story. But okay, so there can be gradations among animals. But human beings, when you manifest it in a human body, it's because the jiva really needs a very sophisticated, versatile instrument in order to express the potential of its own consciousness. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to express the divine potential at all, but whatever longings and desires and wanting of experience, the human body gives us unlimited potential. And we don't need a form more sophisticated than the human body, because the human body can develop ego consciousness to the point where we are self-aware and then can begin to make choices. See, what the animals lack is sufficient objective self-awareness to be able to evaluate their choices. They're driven by instinct, and many of their instincts are noble and giving. It's not like they're gross in every way. It's just there is a limit to what an animal body can express compared to the brain and nervous system of a human. And one of the things that's very confusing to people who don't understand self-realization is that the human brain, apparently, from a materialistic perspective, has a lot of wasted potential. That there's just a lot more potential that seemingly most people don't tap. But it's there because the human body is capable of experiencing infinity. And that's, you can attain God realization through a human body. And that's why we have it. But once we reach the human level, we can also wander in delusion almost indefinitely, because we now have free will. We're not just driven by instinct. There is the compelling power of the river seeking the ocean, which is the individual jiva is trying to return to its inner point of origin. And I'm putting my hand outward as I say it, but really the compelling urge is to move inward. It's inward and upward is where we're moving. Where we're really moving is from the medulla, and it's the medulla and the spiritual eye. This is the same chakra. It's the 6th chakra. And the medulla and the spiritual eye are the opposite poles of the same chakra. And this is the chakra of our individual self-definition. And the medulla, according to Master, is the point of origin of the whole human body. When the sperm and the ovum come together, and if there's a spark of life that causes that union to begin to manifest a human body, that the point of origin is the medulla, because that's when individuality begins, the jiva right here. And I've been told that you can't operate, if you can't cut into the medulla because it's the source of life. You can operate all around, but you can't operate there, so I've been told, because it severs the origin point. So here is when we identify with our limited individual expression. I mean, we have an individual expression, even a master has. Paramahansa Yogananda had a body. He had a mother and a father and 7 siblings. And he grew from youth to old age. And he laughed and he ate dinner and he, did all these sorts of things that individual did those things. Anandamoyi Ma had a clearly discernible individuality. She always referred to the body she lived in as this body. She never referred to it as my body. But nonetheless, there was a distinct individuality. So the individuality is always there. That's what the 6th chakra is. But the 2 poles of that chakra represent the self-definition we have about that individuality. And when our consciousness is centered at the medulla, we define ourselves according to those conditions which outline this individual as being separate. This is my body, my body. And therefore, since this is my body, I am female. Since this is my body, I have a certain age. That age has a certain biological origin, which gives me a culture and a religious context and a language and a country and my father's hair, which doesn't seem to turn gray despite the passing of the years. Just all these different things that are unique to my individuality. Now, they're going to exist, but do I, now I, the jiva, who has been, I don't remember all the way back to being a diamond, but if Master's statement is true, I guess I was. And I was a lizard, and I was a squirrel, and maybe I was a Great Dane. Who knows? I went through all of those different things until I could manifest a body, and then I finally manifested this one, most recently, that I live in. Do I define my reality as being this body, or have I, through the power of meditation, kriya, devotion, service, and the grace of the Guru, do I see this individuality in the context of Christ consciousness, in the context of this great infinity of reality in which this little bubble also moves? See, this is Anandamoyi Ma. She identified, her self-definition was this infinite force of spirit, And she watched this body do things, and this body did things, and it was the one that she was primarily inhabiting. Master, when toward the end of his life, when he was in a very exalted mood, he was always in an exalted state, but during the time that Swami knew him, he allowed his consciousness to, his work was mostly done, so he was able to allow his consciousness to float freer. And Swami talked about walking with Master, and Master was leaning on his arm, and Master stumbled and had trouble walking, and Swami had to catch him to keep him from falling. And Master said, I feel myself in so many bodies, sometimes I forget which one I'm supposed to keep going. And then he said, I have to ask the people around me whether I've eaten or not. Now, those are wonderful things to contemplate, because most of us are so strongly identified that of course we know whether we've eaten or not. And there's never any question as to which body I'm supposed to move. It's so instinctively, I'm so deeply embedded in the reality of this that of course I keep doing it. Now, of course, most of the time Master knew whether he'd eaten or not, and he knew which body to keep going. But every so often the bhav would take him and he would be somewhere else. I watched that with Swami Kriyananda at the end of Swami's life when his work was mostly done. He just didn't hold his mind to this world very much. There was a point at which Swami stopped driving his car, and it was, what would it have been? I don't know if it was as early as the late 80s. More likely it was into the 90s a little bit, but we were with him in Assisi. And he drove his car to town that night, and he actually ran into another car on the road, which, as it happened, was a van driven by our own people. So he was in a very small accident, but it was with our own people, so there was no issue. That was just coincidence and good karma. But Swami never drove after that, because he just said quite simply he couldn't keep his mind on it. He didn't want to keep his mind on it. And so he just allowed others to drive him, because it required from him at that point a kind of concentration that he just wasn't willing. He wasn't willing to use. He wasn't willing to use his consciousness in that way. So with all of this, and I'm going back now to the point where you saw me try to remember what the thought was. It was about the lizard that I was trying to catch there. You see, all of this is how we get to this point. And we've gone through time after time and lesson after lesson, just learning what we have to learn, whether we're dogs or cats or human beings, whether we're highly educated, sophisticated, refined, artistic human beings, or whether we're just coming into a human body and learning how to use it and haven't really gotten up to the mind yet. You see, this is the original caste system was not hereditary, and it was not an instrument of social oppression. It was a way to understand how, once you're in a human body, you evolve. And the stages of Shudra, which is a physical laborer, where the reality of a Shudra is that they understand physical work. They don't understand mental work, and they don't have creativity yet, but they can use a physical body in a skillful way. But then as their awareness of its potential develops, and as their awareness, and this is all like, when I say they, I'm talking about jivas moving up through these gradual stages of awareness. This is not social prejudice on any level. It has nothing to do with religion or nationality, because you have all these castes everywhere. And even because our world is so scrambled right now, low caste, low consciousness people are born in all kinds of circumstances. And these days, a lot of low consciousness people have high positions in society. But that's because it's such a mess. In an ideal balanced society, people who are just getting used to human bodies first work with it physically, and then after they get good at being physical, then their minds begin to wake up, and then they start being clever with their minds, and then they begin to realize that by putting out effort, I can get something I want. And then we progress to the Vaishya level. The Vaishya is considered to be the merchant class because a merchant will give good value, but only if there's something given back. So it's clever, it can be fair and honorable, but it's also what's in it for me. And what's in it for me is a big step, because now I'm aware enough to realize I can influence my own destiny by my own actions, and I can be creative, and I can work hard and get more of what I want. And that's a big step up from being too dull to even know, that I could do anything and get anything, or too lazy. So we're progressing. We're great. We're a selfish merchant. Good for us. It's just like, yes. And then after we use our cleverness and our energy to get for ourselves, we begin to discover that it's not making us as happy as we thought it would. And then either by good karma, by accident, we begin to notice that what really makes me feel good is when I also extend my good fortune and help others. And maybe it starts that you fall in love and you get married and you have children. And so you'll really take care of your children. And that's a step from just taking care of self. And then gradually you might take care of your mother-in-law. And then you'll begin to think about your neighbors. And after a time, as our awareness increases and we begin to escape from being too bewildered to know what right and wrong is, we begin to realize that the satisfaction I'm really seeking comes when I expand my generosity, when I give to others, when I learn what real love is. One of the reasons human beings are so compelled to mate and have children, and then not just in an animalistic way. I mean, some animals take very good care of their children, but human beings have to, because the children don't survive. And it's a great sacrifice on the part of the parents. We're compelled to mate and have children or we're compelled towards sexuality, which may end up with children, is because many people learn about selfless love when they have children. And it's not the raising of children that it's not like so important that we do that, but to learn selfless love is the whole point of the story. And often children, is when we learn selfless love, really begin to learn it. And at first we just want to take care of our own children, but gradually our awareness increases and we realize that what I really love is selfless love. And when we begin to move into acting not just for self-interest, but we start acting because of an ideal, then we move into the Kshatriya level. And Kshatriya is the warrior and the king. Now this is an ideal of leadership, again, that is not prevalent in our society. Almost all of our global leaders are Vaishya at best. Many of them are just Shudras who are just grabbing for themselves. Vaishyas are sometimes clever. We have very few anywhere on the planet true Kshatriya leaders. But there are some. I don't want to be rude about it. There are some, but it's not a high culture. So it's mostly Vaishyas and Shudras. But Kshatriyas, the true leader, the true king, is the servant of his people because he has realized that the greatest happiness is in providing happiness for everyone. So he sees his leadership as to serve his people, not to be uplifted and made wealthy and made important and allowed to exercise his power. That's the Vaishya. But the true Kshatriya is the ideal that moves him is, how can I serve? And the epitome of for the ideal, the Kshatriya lives for his ideal of what he knows is right. And so the warrior, the king, knows that, my responsibility is for the welfare of this kingdom and for the welfare of my citizens. And all his thoughts and decisions are not for what can I get for myself, but how can I give to my people? And that's his ideal. How can I serve? And the soldier, the warrior, is the absolute epitome of completely selfless giving for an ideal. And now let's not think about whether war is a good or a bad thing, but a soldier disciplines all the natural desires He lives austere, he lives solitary, and he goes forward and he literally will lay down his life to protect those he loves, or his country that he loves, or the ideal that his country represents to him. So a kshatriya is tremendous progress on this stage. And the fourth caste is the Brahmin caste, which is the priest. And so after a time, the kshatriya understands that the highest ideal worth living for is to do the will of God. And the Brahmin has advanced to the stage where the only consideration for the Brahmin is, what does God want of me? And then all the worldly things just fall aside because it's not his destiny anymore. Now, every soul, every jiva, and I'll go back to Master remembering back to being a diamond, every jiva has to go through this long process. And every jiva will eventually become self-realized, because within every sentient being there is this drive for greater and greater awareness, and then that awareness, eventually we recognize that we will not be satisfied till it's infinite. We can take a very long time. Now bear in mind, we've had millions of incarnations, I think, even to get to the human level, and then we have millions of incarnations to get to the point where we've passed through all those stages of the caste. Now, just think how slowly we learn, how much experience it takes us to really shift our attention in some fundamental way. Just like I thought when I started on the path, when I came to Ananda, well, when I met Swami, I was 22, and I really understood what was possible because I saw it in him. I don't know why, but I decided it would take me about 5 years. Now, I didn't really think that I would be God realized in 5 years. That wasn't the delusion exactly, but I just somehow thought that I would just have it all figured out and have it together in 5 years, to say the least. That mistake was corrected fairly soon. And it's just like I've gone through 50 years, 10 times that period of time. And by the grace of God, I am an entirely different person than I was when I started, by the grace of Swamiji. There's no question about that. But my, learning is not as automatic as I thought it was. And the hold that the vrittis have on us, wisdom, although the natural state of man is eclipsed by cosmic delusion, by habits of the past, by fears of the past, by, just countless. I don't have to make a list. You can make a list for yourself. All these things that just make progress much less, much slower than we hope it would be. And also much more difficult to comprehend. It's just a whole different thing. But here's the point. Master remembered back to being a diamond. And then he incarnated as Yogananda, and he was a fully realized avatar. He said that he was Arjuna to Krishna. And even at that point, he said his realization came, quote, a long time ago. And Arjuna, plays the devotee, but Arjuna and Krishna, Arjuna was already, a free soul at that point. So that means that Master went through all of this. Master worked his way up out of the animals into the human. He was born as a Shudra. He had to go through all of that to get all the way to the point where he was a free soul and could come back as an avatar for us. So there's no stage of this journey that Master didn't go through. Same is true of the Buddha, same is true of Krishna, same is true of Sri Yukteswar, of Lahiri Mahashaya, of Jesus Christ. I mean, this is Sanatan Dharma. This is the missing link in Christianity, because they don't understand where Jesus came from. It was the only Son of God, and he was just dropped on us. And because we don't know where he came from, we don't really understand how to be therefore perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect. But over time, Christianity is getting straightened out, and Yogananda came to show that the original teachings of Jesus and the original teachings of Krishna were exactly the same teachings, because this is Sanatana Dharma. This is the eternal religion. We are jivas manifested from Satchidananda. We go through this long process. Okay, Jesus went this way, Buddha went this way, Krishna went this way, Yogananda went this way, Lahiri went this way, Sri Yukteswar went this way. You think they don't understand? I mean, they reached enlightenment. They became free. But he remembers back to being a diamond. That means he did everything in between. He manifested the body. That was the best one he could do. That indicated the state of awareness he was in. And he lived in it in the state of awareness that he had. And from that experience, he progressed. So when the divine looks at us and watches us being a lizard, God doesn't feel, why are you a lizard? Well, I'm a lizard because yesterday I was a diamond, you know? It's like lizard. I thought lizard was a big step up. I was a cockroach before this, you know? It's like lizard is doing great. And when we get to be a Shudra and we're all the way to a Shudra and all we can do is just eat, sleep, and have sex and then go to sleep again, you know, it's like, look at me, I'm doing this. You know, last lifetime, what was I? I was a skunk. You know, I was a sloth somewhere. Who knows what I was? But here I am, I'm a human being, I have a human body. I can walk around, I can eat with my hands instead of with my snout. You know, look at me, I'm getting really good. And then, of course, as a Shudra, we do lots of stupid things. As a Vaishya, we do lots of stupid things. As a Kshatriya, we're not yet a Brahmin. We do lots of stupid things. The all-pervading is not concerned about people's sins or virtues. The all-pervading, which is another beautiful way of speaking of the divine power knows what's happening. We're just moving forward. And we're equally loved by God. Every single jiva is equally loved by God. In the present time that we live in, 2021, which is tumultuous to say the least, I think it's the beginning of tumultuous times that are going to have many different forms for a while. The Master said that we would go through a very tumultuous period here. There's a lot of shadow people, I call them, people who live in the shadow instead of living in the light. There's a tremendous number of light beings incarnated on the planet right now. In countless ways, the light is growing, and I've become very optimistic lately. There's just countless examples, people working, you know, for organic food and for vegetarianism and for solar power and for cleaning the plastic out of the ocean, and just there's all these new ways of making people healthy, and there's so many great initiatives that are just all coming together. And then there's all these shadow people who are just mean, you know, really mean. They're terrible Vaishyas, or Shudras who are just being run by terrible Vaishyas who are grabbing and holding and hurting and crushing and all of that. It's all going on at the same time. But here's the part that's important. God loves us all equally. We're all his children. And whatever stage those shadow people have been through or are going through, the only reason that I don't want to do it is because I already tried it and I found out it didn't work. And one of the things that Yogananda said is anything in this world that you're not drawn to anymore is because you tried it and you found out that it didn't work. So when Divine Mother sees a jiva trying out a certain behavior, he doesn't hate you for it. He knows he doesn't have to, because it will bring its own consequences. God doesn't have to punish us, because when we make wrong choices, we get the result of our wrong choices, and that's how we learn. We learn that this satisfaction was short-lived, and the consequences of it were not pleasant, and been there, done that, and we gradually figure it out. So the all-pervading doesn't care about our sins or our virtues. It's just simply the power of the divine just keeps drawing us forward. And we get bewildered. But if we listen and watch and pay attention to everything else that's written in the Gita, then step by step we'll find our way to the light. God bless you.